While we usually associate role-playing games with in-depth stories, strong characterization, stats, leveling systems, and more, they can also be some of the toughest games to play. Some of them have obscure systems which take time to learn or tough bosses to defeat. And then there are some that wear their difficulty on their sleeve, encouraging you to rage non-stop. So let's take a look at 14 of the hardest RPGs ever made. Dark Souls. Your mileage may vary, but the first Dark Souls remains a challenge to this day. Many of the initial problems lay in managing stamina, learning enemy patterns, knowing where to dodge, and striking at the right time. However, even after the early tussle with the Tauros demon, far greater challenges await, like the likes of Ornstein and Smough. For all of its difficulty, Dark Souls drew us in with a compelling story, world building, and environmental design that is always fun to revisit. Demon Souls. Of course, we'd be remiss in mentioning Dark Souls without speaking of its predecessor, Demon Souls. Paying homage to old-school difficulty, From Software's Epic immediately thrust you into the action, challenging you to master its combat while dealing with overwhelming odds. Considered stoic and rigid, the world eventually warmed up to the exploration and challenge. The asynchronous multiplayer was similarly a hit as players left messages for each other, appeared as ghosts in one's playthrough, and much more. King's Field. And of course, it would be impossible to appreciate Demon Souls without mentioning King's Field. The first-person dungeon crawler features stamina meters for its attacks and magic, heralding the trends to come. Combat isn't necessarily as in-depth as a Souls-like. Instead, King's Field focuses on exploration, navigating labyrinthine dungeons while also avoiding traps and finding secret rooms. Awkward controls and an oppressive atmosphere further fed into the difficulty, making it an acquired taste even for those who could handle tough combat. Bloodborne. A detour off the Souls-like path, From Software's Bloodborne took a faster, more aggressive approach to combat. Shields were pretty much useless. Taking damage would provide a short window to counterattack and recover health. It was such a radical change from the pace of Dark Souls that it felt amazing and appropriately frustrating at first. Environmental hazards and tough bosses aside, Bloodborne's greatest challenges lay in the Chalice dungeons, with some offering modifiers like half health to further stack the deck against you. Nioh. Akin to Bloodborne, Nioh opts for a faster pace with its Souls-like combat. However, it throws in a dash of Ninja Gaiden and action RPG looter for good measure. Combat focuses on key recovery and stance switches to maximize damage. Some of its bosses could very easily 2 or 3 hit kill you without remorse. There are more powerful builds to acquire and min-maxing to do in the endgame, but you'll have the massive Abyss with its 999 floors, additional boss fights, DLC bosses, and more to keep you constantly on your toes. Wizardry 4: The Return of Wyrdener. It's one thing to play a wizardry title and expect an old-school level of role-playing. It's another to play a wizardry title that was specifically developed to challenge veterans of wizardry titles. You receive no experience points for defeating enemies. It's all about finding a certain item to become stronger, while almost anything can one-shot you. Mapping out the various areas is also difficult, with a variety of traps and challenges. Good luck dealing with the Cosmic Cube and its design, which is a whole other basket case. Overall, if you love the Wizardry series and beg for a challenge, Wizardry 4 will take you to school. Baldur's Gate 2: Shadows of Amn. Considered one of the very best computer RPGs of all time, Baldur's Gate 2: Shadows of Amn didn't mess around with its battles. Deep strategic understanding of foes, debuffing and buffing with mages, and proper team compositions were a necessity to surviving many of the game's battles. Sure, they could be tiring, but there was a real sense of achievement after overcoming dragons, mind flayers, and the like. Alundra. Some games are content to throw tough boss fights your way, but Alundra is different. While its battles don't pose too much challenge for RPG fans, the puzzles will wear on your patience very quickly. Do you like jumping puzzles? How about environmental hazards? Alundra's hit detection could also pose problems, requiring constant reloading to solve some puzzles, and hopefully you saved enough beforehand. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Shin Megami Tensei titles, which includes the Persona series, are generally pretty tough thanks to their complex bosses, parade of boss fights, and more. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne tops them all though. It's very easy to get one-shot by enemies thanks to random back attacks, and the game doesn't explain all of its mechanics very well, making survival even more difficult. Also, along with the usual boss gauntlets, there's Matador, one of the most irritating bosses in the series unless you specifically plan against him. The Last Remnant, Xbox. On top of weird difficulty spikes and crazy tough optional bosses, The Last Remnant on Xbox has enemies that scale with your level. But it's not one-to-one scaling. Instead, the game looks at your battle rank and decides to scale enemies a few levels higher. So if you're battle rank 50, you could get enemies that are level 53 or level 58. Some enemies take on new, tougher forms at higher levels, learning additional skills in the process and making life even worse. Suffice to say, don't go into The Last Remnant without reading up on optimal progression strategies first. Underrail. Underrail takes inspiration from Fallout, offering a myriad of ways to complete its quests. However, the game as a whole can be very unforgiving. It encourages proper build planning as opposed to spending skill points wherever you feel like. Crowd control is also very important in combat, especially when facing multiple enemies, as is knowing what lies around the next corner, because something completely random can and will mess you up. It's a lot of trial and error on top of difficult situations. Age of Decadence. Another CRPG title that emphasizes the importance of choice is Age of Decadence. Your decisions, especially when it comes to character creation, will influence the journey ahead. If you're going for a purely combat-oriented approach, you need to sacrifice stats like charisma and go for strength and constitution, while also understanding how hit chance and weapon type works. Purely non-combat approaches also exist, but overall, this is not a game that lets you specialize in everything and one-shot everyone. Wild Arms XF. As a tactical role-playing game, Wild Arms XF had a thing about annoying players. Slightly higher level enemies can be overpowered. Equipment weight can affect character health points, ticking them down with each turn. Even the missions themselves can be incredibly punishing, immediately failing you if you're spotted in a stealth mission. But if trial and error is your thing, along with preparing the right classes for a mission, Wild Arms XF might be for you. Hoshigami ruining Blue Earth. Right off the bat, Atlus's Hoshigami has a gameplay mechanic which can cause party members to take double damage and disrupting any combos. That's the good news. The bad news is that enemies always scale to the highest party member, except for bosses who are one level higher and also a pain to deal with. Party members, once dead, are gone forever, and the amount of grinding necessary to get a new recruit up to speed, forget the rest of your squad, can be excruciating. But the worst part? You can't save during battles. If you make any mistakes, then the whole battle must be redone. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.